All right. Hi, and welcome back, everyone. So happy to see some of you back. All right. So as a reminder for all of you who are new to this program, I would encourage you to set up the interpretation. At the bottom of your screen, you have the interpretation button with the little globe icon, and then you can choose the language you want to hear this meeting in, either English, Spanish, or Arabic. And while you do that, I would like to thank the Grundfos Foundation for making this program possible. And before we dive, if you have any issue with this interpretation, please text Shay. Oh, sorry, I'm a bit confused. Please text Shay in the chat or me, and then we will do our best to assist you. The interpretation can also be located under the More icon, so feel free to look around to make sure we can hear each other in our preferred language. And as last time, we have quite a few people joining today. We are now over 1,700 people registered, which is quite impressive. And I'm really, really glad that it's an interest for so many people. We won't be able to hear from you directly today, but feel free to comment, ask questions, share reflections in the chat, in the language of your choice, and then we can either address your questions later during the session, or we'll share the notes with the presenters, with the speakers, and we can address them in writing after the session. As usual, this meeting is recorded, and then we will share the recordings with you in a couple of days after we are done with the editing for adding the interpretation tracks. A note for today, you should have received an email from me on Tuesday about when I shared the slides. All the slides and resources are shared in the Google Drive. We will share the link with you in the chat in a few minutes. And this Google Drive will also be used for group exercises like today, because we have more hands-on workshops this year. And because we are so many people, we cannot all share or group work together. So for us to still be able to look at each other's work and reflections, then we'll have this shared space where we can share comments and share work and all that. So we'll share this link with you, and then we'll share instructions after as well during the session. You will find in this Google Drive the PDF program for the entire Water and Communications program this year. It is only in English for now. If you do need it in Spanish or Arabic, please let me know and we will make that happen. I also wanted to acknowledge a little mistake that I made yesterday or Tuesday. I gave the wrong dates for World Water Week, so I just wanted to reassure you. World Water Week is the 24th to 28th of August this year, and you can buy your tickets online. I believe the early bird is until today or maybe yesterday, but you can still, the program will be shared tomorrow or today. And it's free to register online. So I would really encourage you to pursue this conversation and to have much more insight on such a wide variety of topics if you register for World Water Week. Enough of me. Now I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. It's Georgette Mrakadeh-Keane, and I hope I pronounced your name right. Georgette is currently managing the communications at the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation, known as AGWA. She has previously worked for the UN Secretariat with the UN 2023 Water Conference, as well as the Stockholm International Water Institute, SIWI, where I had the pleasure to work with her. During her time at SIWI, Georgette hosted the SIWI Corners at World Water Week, and she was responsible for the multimedia content development. And now, with her broad expertise on international spaces, online engagement, communications, and water, Georgette will lead us through today's workshop, which will last until the end of the 1.5 hour together. And the workshop is titled From Buzzwords to Buy-in, Turning Talk into Impact. Georgette, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Cecile. So hopefully everybody can see my
We
my
see
presentation.
your notes, so you need to flip the. Yeah, now we're good.
Perfect. So the ability to communicate water has many meanings and values is fundamental to driving action and from communities to companies to countries, because water is life, water is also food, water is peace, water is education, it's energy, it's trade, it's equality, it's prosperity, and all of these statements are true. But depending on who you're speaking to and what they want and what you want from them, some of these statements are more important than others. So the goal of this workshop is to equip you with some concrete tools to engage diverse audiences, foster a somewhat of a common understanding of water issues, but most specifically to drive action through tailored messaging. So I want to start with why I love talking about water. So first of all, thank you to Cecile and Shay for putting this program together, and to Maggie and Jose for kicking us off on Tuesday. I'm going to start by introducing myself, and then we'll go straight into an individual exercise. So please have a pen and paper ready. I find it easiest to work with a pen and paper, but if that's not accessible to you, you can open up a blank document to write into as well. After the exercise, I'll go through a presentation on some approaches and tools that we can use, and then we'll have a group exercise at the end, and I'm going to leave as much time as possible for that, so you guys can carry on getting to know each other and working together on these sort of shared issues and goals. So I want to know where you're coming from and who you want to talk to. So a poll is going to appear where you can select your background in terms of whether you're coming from a water and climate, just climate, or neither of those backgrounds. And also, I want to know, who are you trying to talk to? Obviously, you've decided to join this program because you want to know more about water and communications or develop certain skills or approaches. So I'd love to know who it is you want to talk to or approach. It could be people you're already speaking to and you want to improve that, or it could be new sort of audiences that you want to contact and be able to connect to. So a tiny bit about myself. From the UK, and then I moved to Sweden, and I had lots of different jobs. I fixed phones, I fed fish, and then eventually I joined CIVI. Within weeks, I had immersed myself in learning from my colleagues at every opportunity. And I too had the limited sort of understanding and approach to water that Maggie mentioned on Tuesday, this idea that it's about clean, it's a humanitarian issue, and it's far, far away. But in 2019, when I joined CIVI, I had my great revelation that water touches everyone and everything. And that's why I love talking about water, because no matter who you're talking to or what you're talking about, you can connect through water, you can make water relevant, water can provide solutions, it can provide context. So that's why I love talking about water. And I've done that on and off since 2019. As Cecile said, I was at CIWI, and then I moved on to working for you at the UN to run the communications for the water conference and support that. And then more recently for the Alliance for Global Water Adaptation. And all of these have had many different topics within them, from making sure people can menstruate with dignity to how to broker peace, how to empower young people. And it's all been done through the medium of water. So that's why I love talking about water. So what I want to know is, before we get started, and here's time for the individual activity, I want to know, what is the story, or more specifically, what is your story? What is the story that you want to tell and that you want to use improved communication skills to communicate? This will offer, as I go through the reflections and learnings and tools, knowing the story you want to tell will help provide some context, and it's always a great place to start before you are putting together a piece of communications or a speech or a strategy. It's really important to understand, what is your story. So I want you to spend 60 seconds, and I'll time it, thinking about the story you want to tell and who you want to tell it to. So it could be an interview you want to do, or an article, or a piece of research. Think about, what is that story, and jot it down. Doesn't have to be complete sentences, it doesn't have to be a complete idea, but just keywords and ideas about the story that you want to tell. So I'll give you guys 60 seconds starting from now. Okay, perfect. So now hopefully you've been able to write down what your story is. Now I want to know, what is it that you want? So spend 3 minutes writing down, what is it you want? Why have you logged on to this Zoom at whatever time you've logged on? What is it you want to achieve? Why do you want to tell this story? Ultimately, think about the moment when you put your pen down or close your computer and think, we did it. So think big, think long term. So for example, writing an article to secure funding for a project isn't an end goal, but what the project is working towards, that's your end goal. So I want you to spend 3 minutes writing down what your sort of ultimate overall overarching goal is with the story you want to tell. Once you've got 3 minutes, starting from now, we'll say, and once you have that goal, if you feel comfortable, please share it in the chat, just in one short sentence, no more than 10 or 15 words. So because it could also be that some people have similar, aligned, or shared goals, or maybe somebody else's goal will get you thinking. So 3 minutes, write down what it is that you want, your ultimate goal, and then when you have come to that, pop it in the chat if you feel comfortable to do so.
We already have a few comments coming.
Yeah, so I see, people are already sharing, which is great. Am I muted? No.
We can hear you.
There you go. Okay, perfect. So showing the role to make African water projects generate investment, getting people to value water and its growing scarcity, awareness about the importance of WASH. Okay, perfect. These are all really good, strong goals, and we're already seeing a lot of overlap. What I would also ask you to think about is, okay, so critical water literacy for all. Why is that important? To what end do we need people to have water literacy? Or so creating and developing models for early warning models for disaster. What's the end goal for that?
Stopped.
I mean, I can obviously imagine that it's reducing loss of life, reducing the impact on livelihoods, protecting urban infrastructure, making sure cities stay safe. So I want you to, so a lot of these are, I would say, maybe half a step from what the ultimate goal is. So these are really great framing sort of statements to help understand why you're telling your story. So yeah, livable, resilient, water safe and inclusive cities. Solutions for water scarcity. Raising awareness. Okay, perfect. So a great range of goals, and also already seeing a lot of overlapping in terms of what some of these goals are. So hopefully you guys will get to collaborate not only just today, but also in the next few weeks as well on establishing and reaching these goals. So now you know what your story is and what you want. So I would say, in principle, you have the very start of a process, which is the story you want to tell, and you have the very end of the process, which is what you want to achieve. So now I want you to spend 5 minutes writing down what needs to happen for that to happen. So from writing your article to, for example, having water resilient cities, what needs to happen in between? I find it most useful to work backwards from the big thing. And I want you to think about, who do you need to talk to? Does the government need to be involved? How do the local communities need to be involved? In which sense? How early? In what capacity? What sort of collaboration do you need? Does it require infrastructure? Do you need things to be legislated? Do you need to start involving lawmaking bodies to achieve your goal? So I want you to think, like I said, you've got the story, that's the start of this process. The end of the process is your ultimate goal. And I want you to spend 6 minutes thinking about and filling in those gaps in between of what needs to happen to get to your goal. So you've got 6 minutes, and I'll let you know when you've got 2 minutes left. So we have got a couple minutes left. So give yourself time to think about the different points on this process. As I said, I find it easier to work backwards from the ultimate goal. And think about who you want to be talking to at all of those points. So Felicia, for example, has shared a really clear process of what needs to happen. But within that process, what you're seeing is, for example, infrastructural design. Who needs to be spoken to? Who needs to care about your topic for you to be able to start designing infrastructure to be climate resilient? Things like that. Okay, so you'll be happy to know that you can put your pens down now for a minute and take a break. But I just want to say thank you all for really committing to and giving the time and focus to getting that done. Because what we are going to do now is go on to, like I said, some reflections, common barriers, ways of thinking about how we're talking about water. And it's really important that you know your story, what you want to say, why you want to say it, and who you want to say it to. And then we'll build on that in the exercise at the end. So thank you again for putting the focus into that. And I also really appreciate you putting the focus into joining this session today. I know there's lots of competing interests on our computers, so I really do appreciate that everyone is following along the activities. Okay, so I want to start with some common barriers that can stand in the way of communicating to the people that we've been wanting to speak to in these lists that we've been talking about. So, for example, one quite common barrier is lack of, say, climate or literacy or water expertise. It could be somebody's first time reporting on a COP or attending a COP, for example, and then you want them to care about your project or your message or city resilience, things like that. So there's a lot of resources out there that can help already, that can help tackle lack of literacy, climate literacy or water expertise. There's really great explainers, definitions, and communications tools out there from the UN and other organizations. The UNDP, for example, has a great climate glossary that can help empower people with some of the words that are being used and help invite them into those conversations. Similarly, for lack of water expertise, and CIWI and World Water Week is a great sort of organization and forum for creating accessible explainers of key water concepts. For example, Maggie and Jose's presentation on Tuesday was a great entrance into thinking about water and climate. And when you're talking to people and you want to overcome a lack of sort of existing knowledge, one great way in is to focus on the human stories behind the data or the concept or the theory that you're trying to share, because that's often the way that we find easiest to relate to a fact or a theory of, say, waste management, is how will it impact people if it's done properly, or how it's impacting people if it's being done poorly. And then we have a perceived lack of relevance. And this one, I think, is one of the, I would say, almost the most important one, because the other two can be, those knowledge gaps can be bridged. And, not everybody can be an expert in everything, and that's okay. But what we need to do is make sure people understand and demonstrate how water issues are sort of intrinsically linked to whatever it is that they work on, from political decisions, economic stability, social justice, human health, any of those fields of research or policy making. We need to demonstrate how water is sort of intrinsically linked to that. And different audiences will have, of course, different familiarities with different levels of familiarity with the subject, as I said. And adapting your writing and how you're speaking to these people will help you find a balance between providing essential information and avoiding unnecessary complexity and keeping them engaged and helping them understand the relevance of what you're talking about. So by tailoring your content to the audience's knowledge level, your message stays accessible and relevant. And that clarity, it builds understanding, but it keeps people engaged, most importantly. Because once you're engaged, you can understand more, you can learn more, you can have that gap bridged. And we can overcome the barriers that I was just talking about by understanding who we are speaking to and what language they're speaking. So here are 3 sort of key things to think about when you're adapting to who you're speaking to. The tone of your writing, that's what sets the emotional atmosphere. So formal, informal, professional, humorous. And I know there's a session in a couple of weeks. It's going to be looking at the use of, say, comedy in this sort of communication. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more from the experts on that. So that's your tone. Your style is it simple language or is it technical language? Or is it engaging language? Is it sort of catchy headlines that then go into more detail once the person is engaged? And it might seem obvious, it should always be engaging, of course. But what people consider engaging, of course, differs. So a dense technical article might not be very engaging for 90% of the people that click on it. But the people it is engaging for, that 10%, that might be who you're trying to talk to. And then it's important that you do reach them. So it's this constant balance of finding, it's a constant sort of work of finding this balance between who you're speaking to and engaging them. And then we've also got language. So choice of language is closely tied to a lot of things, from the audience's cultural backgrounds, their preferences, their expertise, but also the words they use to talk about their own work. So when you're thinking about language, try to think, for example, what that person might sit down and Google in a relation to their work. And I'm going to start with this question when we think about how do we choose the right words to talk to people. So what are we talking about when we talk about water? Or if you're joining from a climate perspective, what are you talking about when you talk about climate? So there are the obvious pillars of water issues: too dirty, too little, too much. Or with climate, you have global heating and drought, extreme weather events, emissions. But what do those words mean? So if, for example, a water utilities company has reduced its emissions by 40%, what does that mean? And that changes depending on who you're speaking to. And that is what I want to explore today. So a water utilities company has reduced its emissions by 40%. Could be a story about the company reaching its science-based targets. It could be about the company saving money and increasing profits through effective operation. It could be a story about innovation in climate technology or water technology, or both. It could be presented as a blueprint for municipalities and cities to follow in reducing their own emissions when it comes to delivery of water services. It could be replicated in agriculture or industry. So this one sentence, depending on who you're presenting it to, you can present it in a number of different ways. So I wanted to give a little bit of a more sort of practical example of this. So I searched water and climate crisis on the Guardian website recently. I chose the Guardian because it's ranked as one of the top websites in terms of its coverage of climate issues, and it is free to access. You don't require a subscription or anything like that. So that's just an explanation of why I chose this source. And this is a screenshot of the stories that appeared in the search. So we have birds returning to their home in China, a literal power struggle between data centers and local communities, and quinoa in Bolivia. And all of these stories are about climate and water. And so if we take the story at the top right, on the fight to save wetlands in Colombia. So a widely stated fact is that wetlands are deteriorating 3 times as fast as forests. And that is shocking to hear. But it is quite hard to understand what that actually means. What are the real world implications of that, the loss of those wetlands? So for the stilt people in Colombia, this community that's being written about, it means hunger. The destruction of these wetlands means hunger. In another area in Colombia or elsewhere, it could mean increased risk of floods or droughts. So when we look across all these stories that are, undeniably about water and the climate crisis, we kind of see a secondary set of topics emerge. Energy, economy, food, pollution, glaciers, wetlands, big tech. And many of these topics can be used as a filter through which people see these stories. So if we build, now we're working sort of in reverse, where the story is at the very end. And then we can take a step out and say, oh, well, you can approach it from an economic perspective or a food perspective or an energy perspective. So, for example, the headline about glacier meltdown risks food and water supply, that's a food perspective. From an energy perspective, glaciers feed hydropower. So the headline could be glacier meltdown risks lights out for millions. Overwhelmed, from a wetlands perspective, melting glaciers can overwhelm ecosystems like wetlands. So the headline could also read, glacier meltdown threatens last known sight of a rare bird or a rare animal. So these are all different angles through which you can approach the same story. And here I've grouped the various topics or filters with the other topics that I think have the strongest correlations. So food and energy, or energy and glaciers, or glaciers, wetlands and pollution are all sort of nature related. And I often do this when I'm building a sort of communication strategy or a messaging strategy, because for two reasons. One, it can help you reach a broader audience. So you can think, well, if I'm already talking to or talking about or to big tech, I can broaden it slightly and capture an audience that's interested in energy at the same time. The second reason I find this a useful exercise is because you can also help you build and shape a narrative where I can start with a story about glaciers, which I can link to energy production, and I can then link onto big tech, and then I can link onto the economy. So this is an exercise now, this is how I've grouped them and how I've done it. So I'm not saying this is the only way to do this, but I find this exercise useful in terms of thinking about building those sort of narrative links, and also how you can broaden a story ever so slightly and capture a bigger audience. And next, then, I like to go a little deeper and more specific, looking for sort of key terms related to, say, big tech or pollution. Because identifying these groups of words can help you then when you're starting to write the outline of your story, or a headline of an article, or key talking points for a speech. Now, you might know the key terms already, the relevant key terms for, say, talking about the economy. But some ways that I find useful for finding out key terms that are being used right now is reading headlines in a range of publications that cover the topic, and seeing what words that they use either in their headline or in the introduction, which is what they're using to optimize their content, essentially. So there you can see what these different newspapers or publications consider to be the most important words. Going to websites of organizations working on a specific topic, seeing how they talk about it, look for words that crop up across, say, several websites. Searching the topic on LinkedIn and seeing how individuals and thought leaders are talking about the topic. Of course, like attending events and webinars and hearing experts speak and trying to find patterns in how they're speaking about specific topics. Or another one is, especially if you're looking at speaking more towards governments, which I know that a lot of people did say that they wanted to be working towards governments. You can look at how your government talks about a topic by going to the website, looking at speeches, press releases, understanding which ministry is responsible for certain issues. And that will give you a good context for how they are speaking about it and the lens through which they're viewing this issue. Because for them to then get them to come over to thinking about water, you need to walk essentially across the road, hold their hand and bring them over to where you are. So this exercise really helps understand where people are and the words that are going to resonate with them. Another way of looking at it is through visualizing sort of who you're talking to and what they are concerned about. So this is an image for this year's Global Risks Report from the World Economic Forum, I was surprised to find out it's not available. Well, I couldn't find it on their website in other languages apart from English, so I do apologise for that. We don't need to get too into the details about which risks are biggest and things like that, but rather spend a moment looking at the risks listed. So things like a decline in health and well-being, armed conflict, natural resource shortages are a few of the risks that have been identified as the greatest risks the world currently faces by experts and researchers. So most people that you want to speak to, if not all, will be concerned about one or more of the risks on this map. Their work will be focused on reducing and tackling at least one of the risks on this map. And then you might think, okay, but what does that have to do with water? Well, we start with the obvious ones, so the ones that I've just turned yellow. These are predominantly environmental, natural resource shortage, pollution, biodiversity loss. So anyone working with these risks needs to be thinking about water, of course, how to protect it as a natural resource, thinking about groundwater, the hydrological cycle, how it protects ecosystems. And that, as I said, this is the first step of these connections. This is the most obvious connection to water, and hopefully they're already thinking about water. But even here, you can think about how to approach a person that works on biodiversity from the biodiversity angle, rather than approaching them from the biodiversity loss angle, rather than telling them about droughts. Then we move on to the impact that, so now the more yellow dots, we move on to the impact that water and environmental risks have on society. For example, for decline in health, we're looking at things like disease carried by water, lack of sanitation, food insecurity from droughts that leads to malnourishment. So somebody whose work focuses solely on health is very much dependent on water, on the availability of clean and unpolluted water and the supply chains that ensure that that water is clean and unpolluted. Or an organization that wants to tackle lack of employment opportunity. So one barrier to employment for women and girls is the amount of time they spend fetching water. It means they miss school as children, which means it's less likely for them to have a formal education. And if they do manage to get a job, which is harder because they don't have an education, if they do manage to get a job, they still have to spend that time collecting water. So it's hard for them to keep a job or work full time. So if you're speaking to someone who's concerned about empowering women with employment and economic independence, we're not talking about water as a natural resource or a way of protecting biodiversity. We're talking about it as a tool to increase access to education and employment. And I find a good way of looking at this, and Siri's done a great amount of work on making these connections, is thinking about the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. So many organizations might have these in their mandates. So in this case, no poverty and quality education will be two SDGs that could be in an NGO's or an IGO's or even a government ministry's mandate. If you understand what it is that they're concerned about solving, you can bring them water as a solution to that problem specifically. And then we can also take that one step further. So we're moving on to issues of security, interstate or armed violence over resources, disruption of critical supply chains, misinformation. If the water that's cooling the energy production for an industrial plant dries up, that industrial plant shuts down. If floods disrupt water treatment plants, that cuts off access and delivery of clean water. So policymakers who build and implement policy regarding national security and trying to tackle these risks that we just touched on they need to be aware of water. They have to be aware of water. We know that water can build resilient communities and resilient cities. But how they talk about it will look quite different to our starting point as, say, water people. So, for example, terms like environmental protection or the Sustainable Development Goal 15, life on land, will be replaced with phrases like safeguarding natural resources, building resilience to emergencies, and focusing on things like SDG 16, so peace and strong institutions, even if the action being taken, so for example, protecting wetlands to reduce flood risk and prevent destruction of urban infrastructure, is a nature-based action, but it's not being considered or legislated from a nature-based perspective. So that means we need to go over to how they are speaking about it, talking about things like resilience and national security, and the building up, protecting cities, protecting populations and people and communities. and talk to them about how water can help them reduce the risk they are working on. So, link it to their concern and present them with the solution. And then, yeah, climate change will make it all worse. Don't take too much consideration of the graphic design on that. This is one perhaps obvious and definitely widespread narrative that everything's getting worse. And building on that risks map, poor water management, from what I've just been saying, poor water management will cause disease and war and societal collapse. And climate change is making access to water and our ability to manage water more difficult and more unpredictable. But if that narrative exists, that water has the power to cause all those risks and climate change is making it worse, it stands to account that better water management can reduce those risks, and integrating climate and water planning into economic or educational or urban planning can not only reduce risk, but build resilience. And here are some good news stories as an example. So looking at, and from a range of ideas, how they managed to get birds to return to a nature area through water and soil conservation, how farmers are able to enhance their food security in spite of rain and floods, how cities can help protect themselves against flooding, and how AI, which is, I know a couple of people even mentioned that as their goal of how to integrate and harness and make the most of AI in managing water, how we can make sure we do that without compromising our water and energy resources and compounding our problem, without making our problem worse. So this is just a small selection of, I don't want to say good news stories, but solutions-based stories that are talking about water management in 4 very different ways. So I'll just check if there hasn't been anything that's been asked in the chat that's super pressing. No, okay, great. But it looks like everybody has their goal and they also have who they want to speak to. That's perfect. So we're about to go into an activity. We have, if I'm not mistaken, 50 minutes left. I can't see the time, but okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's about that.
Okay, fantastic. So that gives us a really good amount of time for a breakout room. I really hope I didn't speak too fast. I'm kind of surprised we have that much time left, but that's amazing because I really want you guys to be able to start working on what we've been talking about. So if there aren't any initial questions, which I'll give you a minute to, if you have any sort of initial questions you want to pop in the chat, and I'll introduce the group activity. And once I've introduced it, I'll also just give you guys 2 or 3 minutes, grab some water. If you need to get another piece of paper or just stretch your legs, stand up, reflect on what we've been talking about so that you can join the group activity and start getting involved. So a poll is going to pop up again. I want you to, oh, there we go, like magic. I want you to choose your language and you will be put in a breakout room according to the language. So if you end up in a breakout room in a language that you don't want to be speaking in, just come back into the main room or write in the chat to Shay or Cecile, and they will move you into, and just say which language you want to be in, whether it's English, Spanish or Arabic, and they will put you in the right room. So you should all get the poll in front of you and you can click which language you want to be choosing. So, and then, yeah, if you don't see the poll, I see that some people are writing it in the chat, but I would encourage you to try and use the poll. I believe if you go to the sort of come out, if you've got full screen on, it should have appeared. If you haven't got full screen on, just minimize the video and see if you can find the poll, just because that will make things a little bit quicker, just because there is so many of us, which is amazing. So once you've chosen your language, you'll be put into that room. Okay, so what's the activity? I want you guys to think about a specific audience, and the top 3 audiences that were chosen on the poll at the beginning was the government, young people, and women. I mean, obviously they have overlaps. Somebody could be a young woman working in government, but we want to think, so if you want to think about that person, please do. There are 3 links to documents in the chat and also on the Google Drive. Those documents, it's the same document in English, Spanish, and Arabic. I used Google Translate, so please forgive me for the translations. My mum is from Syria, so she'll be really annoyed that I use Google Translate for Arabic, because I know it's not a super reliable translation. But I did try to read it through, and I think it makes sense. So choose the document in the language that you want to read. And in this document, you will see the headline from earlier about glacier meltdown, as well as a small exploration of the various aspects of glacier meltdowns. The human impact, the geographical impact, how it's being experienced around the world, the impact it might have on industry or economy. And then I want to say that you have 25 minutes. When you enter your breakout rooms, do a quick round of introductions, just your name and your organization and where you're based. And I want you to spend the first 5 minutes, and I'll have this up on a slide. I want you to spend the first 5 minutes understanding your audience, imagining it as a single person. So agree quickly within your group. Do you want to do government, young people, or women? And imagine that as a single person, a specific person that works at the government, a specific young person. Where are they from? Their age, their academic or professional background. What do they care about? What risks would they be worried about on that map? What is their ultimate goal? What do they think about day to day? Don't spend any more than 5 minutes on that, but I want you to essentially build a person that you can then talk to. And then go around the group, once you have your person, and each name a keyword that you think is relevant to this person that would catch their attention, in general. So a young person, young people might care about cities, because young people are just sort of disproportionately moving to urban environments, often driven by unemployment. So those are two things that a young person might be thinking about. And there's obviously much more. I'm not young anymore, so I don't know. Then I want you to go around to do the same exercise, but for glaciers. So a little bit like what I did with that news article. So once we're thinking about glaciers, what topics can that be linked out to? So I gave a couple of examples earlier, so hydropower and wetlands. So what topics are linked to glaciers? And then I want you to look, and like I said, I'll write these, I'll post these instructions in the chat, actually, because I'm aware I'm speaking a lot. I want you to then look for essentially an overlap between what catches your target audience's eye and what you can say about glaciers. And where that overlaps is how you're going to hook them. That's how you're going to start talking to someone in their language and get them to listen. And that is how you can build a foundation to tailored messaging. So once you've found this overlap, I want you to put together a few quick bullets. It can be, the introduction to an article or a proposal for a documentary. The format is completely up to you. It could be talking points for a speech. But the important thing is that you start to build a story that will resonate with the person you're speaking to. So we'll come back together in about 25 minutes. Oh, slow down a bit. Sorry for the interpreters. Is there a specific part that anybody needs me to repeat, interpreter-wise? I don't know if they can write in the chat. Like I said, I'll paste this into the chat so people can read the instructions as well. So the format is up to you. The important thing is that it resonates with your audience. So please spend 25 minutes doing this, 5 minutes to build your person. Write down their keywords, write down the topics or SDGs or conferences, or Maggie and Jose talked about the different forums that we can engage with climate. Talk about all of those things and find the ones that overlap with what your person cares about. So if your person is a young person in an urban environment in Thailand, a conference in Switzerland might not be super relevant to them. If they're a government official within the EU, a conference in Switzerland is relevant to them. So that's how I want to start thinking about how you're going to speak to these specific people. And your home will be, if you want to do it, I will not be checking, to do the same exercise at home for the stories you started building at the start. And we'll touch on that again at the end. So build your person for 5 minutes, write down their keywords, write down the topics, SDGs, risks, etc. related to glaciers, find that overlap and build a narrative. So I will paste the instructions into the chat in English, and hopefully that's enough to somebody can use the translation service that they prefer to paste that into. And then really briefly, just while people are grabbing a pen and some water and things like that, I saw that somebody, can these instructions be on a slide or in the chat? Yes, I will put them in the chat. Perfect. And to answer, I think, Elena, what is water for you? That's maybe the hardest question you could have asked me, because I feel like every time I start to dive into one aspect of water that sometimes I didn't even know about it a week before. And then for 2 weeks, it's the most important thing I can think about. And then what I love to do is fit it into a bigger puzzle. So I think one thing for me that really shows what water is the topic of being able to menstruate or have your period with dignity. So for me, that is a really clear example of how it protects our dignity, access to clean water and sanitation, protects our dignity, it respects us as people, it ensures we can access education if we want to, it means we can access employment if we want to, it builds economic independence, it improves our health, it then starts knocking onto every single one of the SDGs. So I find, in terms of the most human example of the power of water, I think that being able to take care of a person, being able to take care of their period safely and with dignity is the essence of what water can do for a society and all of its citizens. But very good question. So I will just copy one of these instructions out, and hopefully everybody has chosen a language now. You'll be put in the next, I don't know, minute or so into those breakout rooms, and the instructions will be sent out as a sort of broadcast to that chat. Cecile, over to you for the coordination of that.
Yeah, so the breakout rooms are now open, so you should be able to join them, see the poll. You can click on join the room. We still have a few people who haven't chosen the language, so if you can chat in the chat which language you want to be put in, and then we can assign you to a room, and then you can go there. Or if you don't want to participate in a group activity, then that's fine. You can just stay here. But yeah, we'll. So you have until 20, right? Like you have 20 minutes. Is that correct?
25. We can do 25.
Okay, sounds great. And then we'll broadcast you a warning before, like 10 minutes before, 5 minutes before the room closes. And then we'll paste the instructions into the Google Documents. If you cannot open it, make sure someone in your group can. If none of you can, then come back to the room and then we'll find another way.
Goodbye, everyone.
We have 10 minutes more for the room, right? Back to you, Georgette.
Okay, perfect. Welcome back, everybody. Huge thank you to Cecile and Shay for coordinating those breakout rooms. And it seems like most of you were able to join a room for the duration of that exercise. So I just want to know how you found it, how you found building your person and finding the words to talk to them. So you can write something in the chat, or please also feel free to raise your hand and share a quick reflection on how that process felt. Let's look in the chat.
We had Elena saying Felicia, Patrick, and Elena had a good discussion. Do you want to share something about your reflections?
Oh, and Felicia, I see you have your hand up. You can unmute yourself.
Yes, I think I am Felicia Ngaji from Nigeria Water Suppliers and Sanitation.
Nice to meet you.
We had a wonderful discussion, Elena, Patrick, and myself. We had Elizabeth, though Elizabeth gave us an apology because she had to drop to go to somewhere. And we looked at glaciers, and we saw that it's one of those natural disasters that we've not experienced it before in Nigeria, and neither is Elena or Patrick. And so we couldn't really talk much about that. But we dived into looking at land reclaiming, where they are reclaiming land and building, distorting waterways and all of that, and the repercussions that follows it. We looked at the incidents that happened in recently in Dubai, where water cannot. We human beings can't decide when water will fall. Water is a natural thing that falls on its own. But when they try to do that, and by the time the water pours out, we saw what happened, and so the disaster it created in the lives of people and all of that. So that was a quick discussion we had. Then we looked at the importance of gender, looking at women in our reflection. And then Mr. Patrick shared a case with us where in Philippines, right now they are coming up with policies that are looking at gender developments, and that because they want to ensure that women are represented in not just the middle level positions, but in higher positions, so that it can be fair and all of that. And so we discussed that, and then we shared our information within ourselves, because we want to continue this discussion outside of here. And so we had the link shared among ourselves, and that's
fantastic.
Yeah, so that was a good group.
That sounds good. Yeah, you got a chance to think about who you were talking to and issues that are relevant and the global perspective. All through, that initial simple story. You might not think that starting to talk about glaciers would take you to getting women into parliament in the Philippines. But that's really great. Thank you so much for sharing. And Boluwaji?
But I don't know if Patrick or Elena have anything to add.
I think in the interest of time, let's see what...
okay, all right, that's fine,
Boluwaji wants to share.
Yes, hello everyone. I'm sorry, I didn't get the names of everybody in my group. But what I found interesting was that what I thought would be, I was thinking, what's the connection? We had built a person, an individual, a 35-year-old from Brazil, AI person. And then when we got to the glaciers and then the risks, so I had thought, really, there'll be no connection. But then very easily, the very first few words that we shared, it was about water shortage, food security, financial. So the glaciers, in terms of the melting of the glaciers in Brazil, linked very much to an individual's fears, worries, and concerns.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of how you can find how the human impact, and you can take that human impact to the relevant person, whether it's within government, whether it's in a local situation. Thank you so much for sharing. And a couple of other people that commented, if you want to share, Hannah, you said you guys had young people as your target. If you want to share a little bit more about your discussion, and or Jessie, or Dunya. Looking at early warning systems. I know that was somebody's goal at the very beginning, was early warning systems. So if anyone else wants to share, please do raise your hand. But it sounds like this exercise was good for understanding like common risks and common fears and links between maybe unrelated seeming individuals and human stories, and also how one news story can be approached in so many different ways, from looking at the tourism aspect or disaster management aspect or food security aspect. I'm not going to force anyone to speak, so then I will just.
I would like to share some of the insights.
Roberto,
Roberto Wilson. It was very rich to share perspectives on water access from Honduras, Mexico, and Chile. We discussed the role of governmental institutions in glacier melting and the repercussions on the data access. And we also addressed the contamination of water sources, which poses a critical challenge to public health. But I would say that the most rich part of the discussion was sharing the common foundation in the Latin American region that allow us to highlight the issue of insecurity and how can insecurity issues can affect the most vulnerable communities around the region.
Super interesting. And then you're also stepping out into looking at things like data, democratizing access and collection of data, making sure it gets back to the people that need it, as well as the other topics. That's really, thank you so much, Roberto, for sharing. It sounds like a really rich conversation. We've got something for Christina asking, so what's your glacier, is a good way of kickstarting a conversation to see if anyone can develop a sense of belonging and identity regardless of their location. I don't know what my glacier is, so I guess I should find that out for next time we meet. Maybe that's how you guys can approach each other if you're at World Water Week. The importance of awareness, data, important role of government, exactly. And Adelaide, if you can share just quickly, like 35, 40 seconds, if you'd like to share, you have your hand up, I saw.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the most fruitful part was building the character, because this is where I really lacked ideas. Working for Development Corporation, we have a wide range of characters, and fortunately or unfortunately, we're usually very limited to who we can think about, because we're also limited to the conditionalities of these, funding. So we're always catering to donor, to like the EU, to BMZ, like Ministry of Development Corporation, blah, 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 blah. But the individual was quite tough for me, and I found this very rewarding. So yeah, just wanted to say
good.
that.
I'm glad. And I think this was, and I will say this was an extremely accelerated way of doing this. So the fact that you guys were able to come to all of these great reflections and have these great discussions is amazing. And I think you've touched on a great point there that, how GIZ versus how the EU might talk about the exact same project based on how you then report back to them as donors could look very different. I think that's another great example of how the words we use need to be relevant to the people we're speaking to. And of course, narrowing it down to an individual can be hard, but I think it can also sometimes be like a quite human way to start, because I think it sometimes is easier to think about speaking to one person. Also because, I'll wrap up now, Cecile, I'm aware that you guys need to have a couple of minutes in a moment, but an individual who works, it could be in the same government, in the same country, but in a slightly different ministry, or within the same ministry, but with a different focus. Even within that quite narrow context, you might need to engage them in slightly different ways. So that's what this sort of process of finding your story, knowing what your goal is, understanding who you need to talk to along the way, who you need to get buy-in from along the way, and then thinking about those individual people or those interest groups or those institutions, understanding how they speak, understanding how you want to speak, tell your story, in this case, the glaciers, finding that overlap, finding those keywords, choosing a format. I saw someone said about a documentary, for example. This was very accelerated, but this is essentially how you can build a messaging platform. It's how you can build a communications strategy. It's how you can fundraise. It's how you can promote research. It's by going through this process with your story or your maybe report or a product at the beginning, or the project, and having your overall goal at the end, and taking this exercise in between. And there was one more thing I was going to say. going through it all. It can't have been that important. But yeah, so very good that yes, now I remember. The more you do this, you'll start, essentially part of what we did was stakeholder mapping and understanding their interests, what channels they're in, what words mean to them. You can build that out. Which social media do they use? Which social media channel is most prominent in that country or in that age group? What are the key publications within the industry that they're working in? Things like that. Once you start building that map of stakeholders and how to talk to them and where to talk to them, then next time you have a story, you don't have to build that from the start. Because what we did now was build from the very beginning through to the very end. So the first exercise where you thought about your story, who to talk to. And the second half was then how to talk to them, how to find the right words. So as I said, a very accelerated process. But once you take the time to do that, and once you've done it once, the next time you do it, it's quicker because you're building on what you already know. And you can adapt it to new audiences or new, so you can have a baseline strategy, for example, if you're going to World Water Week, of 5 groups of people you want to speak to, 5 key messages to get them to care. And then you have those, then you're not building a new one every time you have a new speech or every time you meet a new person. So hopefully this was useful in terms of how to think about how we're talking about water and what water means to all of us, but also to others, more importantly, how we can talk about them, how we can talk about water, who we want to be talking to, and a few tools and methods to try and build out that mapping process. This is just one approach. This is an approach I find really interesting and I find really engaging because I think it's so fun to try and speak somebody else's language, and it really helps. I think it's a really good exercise as well to understand where people are coming from, all the way through from a service user or a farmer or a child in education, all the way through to the person that decides where toilets go or which pipes get built. I think it's a really human aspect of what we can talk about, and I guess that's ultimately what water is to me. It's very human. So thank you again for your time and your focus and committing to these exercises. I hope this was useful. I'll be joining the rest of the sessions in the next 3 weeks. Hopefully I'll see some familiar faces again. I'm looking forward to learning from everyone else. I just want to say thank you again. I want to use this photo again because it's the most professional photo of me that exists. So I'll keep using it until I'm too old to claim that's me. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to Cecile and Shane, first and foremost, for organising this. And as I said, thank you for sharing your time with me, with each other. It's really inspiring to hear your goals. And I do think that through water, we can make these goals a reality. We just need to know who we're talking to and how to speak to them. So I'll leave that there. I'll pass that back to Cecile. I'm glad that people have said thank you. Thank you, guys. Seriously, I really, really, really appreciate the time. And I hope everyone got as excited as I do about talking about water.
And I want to send a thank you back to you because that was a brilliant session, and I learned a lot. Despite we've been working in communications for years, and then you still learn things and practice things. So thanks a lot for this interactive session. For everyone, I invite you to join the panel discussion next week that will be facilitated by Shay, and we will have different journalists and practitioners and communicators from different parts of the world, and we will talk about what makes a good water story. So I really encourage you to join that one. Same time, 2 p.m. Europe time, and then whatever that is in your region will be an hour and a half. And then, yeah, other than that, we'll share recordings, slides, and notes from this session as well. I really wanted to thank Shay for the technical support today. Really wanted to thank Georgette for the great session. And then thank you to the Grundfos Foundation for their support. And thank you all for your engagement. I hope to see you next week.
Yes, see you next week.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Same to you too.